This is the Easy Living Yards podcast. I'm your young at heart host, Ben Hale. Let's jump in and learn how to have a healthy, beautiful yard with less work so you can enjoy more time doing what you love. What's up and welcome to episode 27 of the Easy Living Yards podcast. Today we are talking about backyard ideas for kids and outdoor activities for kids. Let's face it, when it comes to having our family in our landscape and in our home and having a happy space, the backyard and just the yard in general is so important for children to be able to get outside, to get off some energy out of their system and to, blow off some steam sometimes, and just to have some fun, imaginative play sometimes is very important for development, and for also parental breaks is also very important too. And so this topic is something that I really enjoy talking about. I aspire to improve our landscape for our kids so they can have a more imaginative space and to have a more exciting and developmental experience that helps educate them, helps develop their senses and their creativity. And so that's what I hope we can talk about today, is just how do we make our outdoor spaces conducive to a good childhood and a space that our kids can enjoy and develop better, and also at the same time be safe and have fun and be engaged enough to where we can at some point kind of let them be themselves outside, and we can have a break as well as parents to be able to work on the house or to do the dishes or whatever without having to be attending to our kids so much or having to set them in front of the TV. So this is a really important topic and a very fun topic at the same time. So today I hope we can talk about a lot of ideas that can help you think about what's the best thing for your landscape to do to make it fun for your kids. Okay, now before we get into all of that, I want to make an announcement that I am very excited about, and that is that I have a short domain name. Instead of having to type in easylivingyards.com every time you go to visit Easy Living Yards website, you can also go type in ELY.how. That's ELY.how, and that will take you to the Easy Living Yards website as well. So instead of typing in the full domain name, easylivingyards.com, which still works and works just fine, you can now also visit. So if you're on your mobile, of course, I prefer that you stop driving first, right, if you're driving. But if you ever want to visit Easy Living Yards or anything on the Easy Living Yards website, such as the podcast page or the blog or anything for that matter, you can just type in ely.how, and that will take you to the Easy Living Yards website. So for any episode as well, you can just type in ely.how/episode and then the number. So for this episode, episode 27, all you have to do is type in ely.how/episode 27, and that'll take you right to this episode page where you can visit all the show notes, get all the links that we talk about today. And guys, I am dropping tons of links in the show notes today because I'm super jazzed about this topic. I'm super inspired to make our landscape better for our kids, and I hope you guys are inspired to do the same. So I have tons of blogs that I found where tons of bloggers are just writing about all sorts of cool stuff you can do with your backyard to make it better for your kids. And so I want to share all those great resources I found with you. And so certainly today, after we talk about some of this cool stuff, make sure you go on over to the show notes at ely.how/episode 27, and there you'll see all the links we talk about today for all the different topics. So I have tons of links where you can be inspired and see all sorts of different great ideas that people are putting out there on the virtual internet space for all of us to enjoy. Okay. So with that, let's get back on topic a little bit and talk about what makes the backyard fun for kids. So with today's episode, I'm not going to be talking about a bunch of, technical stuff or specific plants or specific design ways to do things or how to start a garden bed or anything like that. We've gotten pretty technical or pretty in-depth with some stuff or pretty how-to oriented. And today, instead, it's an idea episode. So we're talking about a bunch of different ways, a bunch of different ideas of things we can do with our backyards or even your front yard or your side yard. And, we're not limited to the backyard here. That's just typically the space that becomes the kids' space. But today is intended just to spark some creativity in all of our brains to help us thinking about some cool ways to have a unique and an awesome experience for our kids in our backyards. And at the same time, I want us to also try and step in the shoes of our children. So let's try and start looking at our space from the eyes of our kids and from the feet of our kids, right? Feel and run through our space with our kids' feet, I guess is a better analogy. But when we start thinking about and perceiving our space from the eyes of our children, the space becomes entirely different because it's not a practical space. It's not somewhere where we have to cut the grass. It's not somewhere we have to pull weeds. Instead, it's the setting for all of our adventures outside. And it's the setting for imaginative play. And it's the space where we can go out and escape or be free. And so this is what a kid aspires to do in a natural setting, is to be free, to be able to play, to be able to imagine. And so we want to create the best space for them to be able to do that in a way that's safe for them, in a way that's fun and exciting, in a way that makes them want to go outside, right? And in a way that we feel comfortable with having our kids there. So that's what we're trying to achieve today. So when it comes to creating a great space for our kids, the first thing I think about is creating rooms, outdoor rooms. And this isn't like a physical, like walls and ceilings or anything. This is really about creating unique spaces or individualized spaces. So making sure we can create a space where the kid feels like this is my space or this is our space, right? So the kids feel like that is a space designated for them and they can make it their own and create it their own way as well. And so in the process of creating outdoor rooms, essentially what you're doing is you're creating an ambiance or an escape place or a place that sparks the imagination. And so when I'm talking about an outdoor room, I talked about this previously in the backyards episode, a few episodes back. And basically what we're doing here is we're kind of just framing a space, usually with plantings or with hardscape, but it creates some sort of mental barrier, but not necessarily a physical barrier, but there's like a kind of a mental or a psychological shift when you go into this new space where you're in a different space. So a lot of times the play gym is kind of in the back corner of the yard, and it's just this giant wooden thing that you get from Home Depot or wherever, and you put it together and it has like a little awning on top that's colorful and a couple swings and maybe a slide, right? And it's just kind of plopped right in the middle of the backyard, or in the back corner of the backyard. And instead what we can do is we can create a space that the kids can go to and they feel like this is a space for me. And that's kind of what I'm talking about. And of course I'm being very abstract here because each space, each way you create a space is different. It could be framed by a few trees or shrubs, or it could just be, a general transition of the topography even that creates this different space. And how that space is created is different based on the different purposes of your kids' or your child's play space. Okay, so I'm leaving this very abstract and deliberately so because this is something that you define for you and your family and how it works best in your landscape. So I got kind of, for lack of a better term, I got kind of spacey there, right? Now let's kind of drill down and start talking about some more practical stuff or some more tangible things about our kids, okay? So when it comes to backyard fun, and creating a space your kids want, we really have to focus on understanding what do kids want out of an outdoor space, right? What makes a kid want to go outside as opposed to sit in front of the TV, or instead of playing video games, right? Or instead of doing whatever else they do inside, instead of complaining and nagging at you, right? We want our kids to be excited to be outside. And so let's think about the ways or the elements that make a kid want to go outside into a new space or into their space, and what makes them want to stay out there and continue playing and have an immersion into their own world, and to develop and to experience and to have adventure. Okay, so the first thing that comes to mind for me is to have a space that children can call their own. And this goes back to what I just talked about with creating rooms. It's creating a specific area or a specific space that is deliberately set aside for your children. So aside from just a physical space, of course, what's there can really dictate that as well. So if we kind of talked about your typical play set or your play gym, right? That's the first step. Or it could be an outdoor playhouse. But whatever it is, this is something that makes a fun space for imagination and for play. It could be something that allows your kids the flexibility and the availability to get dirty. And I know most of us parents kind of cringe at that, and we're like, oh, we got to throw them in the shower or in the tub, or they're going to track mud all through the house or whatever. Well, that could be the case, actually. But again, thinking from the perspective of your child or your children is what really sparks their imagination and what really triggers them to have fun. And if it's a trade-off of allowing them to get somewhat dirty or to make a bit of a mess, what's a healthy way for them to be able to do that? And what's a healthy space for them to be able to do that as well in a way that they enjoy, and in a way that doesn't conflict with our home, I guess. It doesn't destroy our house, doesn't create a giant mess where they're going to just, ruin all their clothes or anything, but something that they can actually, get a little destructive or get a little creative and get dirty in the same time. It can be very, very beneficial for your child. And also, this space that we're creating could also be something that allows your child to be able to be independent, or to be on their own, or to at least have the feeling that they're on their own. You might be able to supervise them the whole time from a slight distance, but it's something where they're safe enough and they're able to play independently enough that they feel like they're on their own. And that's really important. Okay, this is also a space where your kids can get creative. And so for that, we want to incorporate multiple elements for interaction. And these are, I can't think of a better word here that's not too nerdy, but tactile elements. So things they can touch, and sensory elements, I guess, maybe is another less nerdy term, but something they can feel, touch, see, smell, hear, all those things that trigger the senses and also trigger the creativity or the mind at the same time are very important. So these are things that allow moving parts. They can be things that can be always changing, or that they can change themselves, things that allow them to build stuff. Things for climbing and things for swinging, right? So your typical play set, you think about some of these elements are already incorporated. Well, how can we even incorporate that more into a space? Things that allow for hiding spaces, the use of water, either visually or physically, the use of sand or mud. Again, this is more of a physical thing. To allow children to have something to touch, to mold, to feel, and to create and shape is very important. And also more imaginative elements. So these could be more deliberate things, like think of you may have seen some pictures of like a pirate ship playground, or a fort, a castle, an animal shaped structure, or a cave. So all of these things incorporate a lot of these elements, and also give the creation of a space that's for your children. And I talked also about like an outdoor room or house, a playhouse, and that's also another way to do this. Okay, so that's kind of like some of the, again, a little bit of more abstract stuff about the concept of what we want to create here. And now I want to drill down even further into talking about specific things that you can have in your space that can create some of this stuff or enable some of this stuff to happen for your kids. So to make them feel more creative, to allow for some imagination to happen, allow for open play, allow for the ability to get some energy out, and to allow for also you to feel safe about them and their space. So I'm just going to kind of run through a bunch of these ideas that kind of popped in my head, and these certainly aren't limiting, but I hope they spark some creativity for you in what feels right with your children or your child and the space you're creating for them, and what would add the most appeal over the longest time frame as well. Right? So we want to think about, okay, how does our space last, maybe 5 years from now? Maybe 10 years from now, when our kids are growing, how does this space either evolve along with them, or how does it last to the point where it's still interesting for them as well? Okay, so here's just a few backyard playground ideas that can inspire you to go out and think about what you want to do with your space. So first, an outdoor kitchen. So our kids love having a space inside right now where they can kind of like concoct their little creations and pretend that they're cooking and making all sorts of different wildly odd meals. And so an outdoor kitchen incorporates all those natural elements outside as well that they can use as their so-called ingredients to concoct wonderful creations as well. And it really sparks the imagination. What about a treehouse? This is a very conventional, or not necessarily conventional, but very common, I guess, thought about outdoor play spaces. And what kid doesn't love the idea of having a fort elevated up into a tree? So if that's something that's safe enough for your family, and you have the resources such as a tree to be able to build something like this is something, it's quite a project, but it might create such a wonderful space for your child, it may be worth it. Likewise, if you don't have the availability of verticality, or you just don't feel comfortable with that, you could also consider something like a fort or a teepee that you can build outside. It could be, even if it's something like a teepee or a tent, it could be a semi-permanent structure that you can remove or change or adjust or move around the yard as well, to create that space for them. Likewise, something like an outdoor store where they have supplies that they can play with and store away and pretend that they're selling stuff. My boys actually love imagining that underneath our very conventional play gym out back right now, that it's a store with a little countertop. And they always ask, what can I buy for you? And then they go and turn around and make some noises and grab it off the shelf and that sort of thing. And they love doing checkout. And so something as simple as just even like an enclosed space under a platform right now serves as their outdoor store. So what if we actually had something where we had like even just a simple countertop that they could use as their store checkout area and a few shelves? Something as simple as that could drastically change their experience and increase their ability to have imaginative fun outside. Next, something like a sandbox, a gravel pile, or even a dirt pile can go a long way to allowing just fun play for your kids. And of course, if you're willing to allow a certain level of dirtiness, adding something where they can incorporate water with these elements is a lot of fun for children. And yes, it does create a bit of a mess, but it also creates a space for them to have a lot of fun and occupy themselves for a pretty extended period of time while engaging their mind and their senses as well. So it's very helpful developmentally. It's also very helpful parentally, as you're able to do other things while they're having safe, happy fun. And so right now we don't have a sandbox in our landscape, but we do have a gravel pile and a dirt pile. And the boys love both of those things. They're more byproducts of some of the construction that's gone on around our house as we've slowly been able to modify and update our landscape, as opposed to deliberate things for the kids. But they've turned out to be very wonderful things for them to be able to play and to escape into a different world and to create their own world through these simple spaces. Likewise, having some safe building supplies for them to be able to use to construct whatever they want, whatever creations they want, can actually be very helpful. So this can be something as simple as little blocks of wood to things that might be more complex, or things that you might be able to like acquire several, foam bricks and things like that they can just build and be able to do something with, and to use their creativity to create their own spaces. Something like a hammock is very simple, but also very fun for children. So they can swing in it, they can lay in it and relax. My boys love it when I have a camping hammock, and when I string it up, they love to play in it. They'll go lay in it for a few seconds, and they'll go run, do something else. Then they'll come right back and lay in it for a little bit longer. They love to wrap themselves up like it's a cocoon. So they do all sorts of things. Like, again, these things that appear so simple and kind of boring to an adult allows so much creativity for a child, as long as we have it available to them. Also, something like a slack line or tightrope. If you're not familiar with what a slack line is, you can go look it up. And basically, it's something where it helps with their balance and their development of coordination as well. And so, again, this is something you would want to rig up in a safe manner, but having something like a slack line or a tightrope that kids can walk across or try and balance on and that sort of thing can be very fun and engaging as well. What about an edibles garden? So a garden that they can go into and pick produce as they want to, knowing that it's safe for them and that's available to them. So it's more of as opposed to a food production garden, this is more of a child garden where they can go in, they can see their plants growing. They can, once they learn how to do it, they can pick weeds, that sort of thing. They can water it and take care of their own plants and see the outcome of it. So right now we have the makings of a garden. It's not very productive right now, but our boys love going into the garden because I've let them help plant the garden, and I've let them help select what goes into our garden, and they love going in there. Right now our cherry tomato plants are just starting to ripen, and they love going in there to each day to see if any new cherry tomatoes are ripe, and they don't even make it inside the house. They go right into their mouths and they love picking the cherry tomatoes. And right now, this year, it's the first time we've planted anything like a watermelon plant, and they have some baby watermelons on them, and they're so excited to see those baby watermelons. And so just incorporating some edible garden elements into a landscape can be very fun and exciting for a kid. Now, the important thing here, too, is just to know that they have to know what they can and cannot put in their mouths. So I just mentioned tomatoes. The leaves of tomatoes and potato plants are actually toxic. And so we have to coach, even our 2-year-old understands, you only pick the red tomatoes, and if it's the red tomatoes, you're allowed to put them in your mouth. Everything else you don't put in your mouth. And so even at a young age, they're learning what's safe and what's not safe, and in a way that we feel comfortable allowing them to wander into the garden themselves to pick things. Okay, what about something like a construction area, right? So something that has shovels and trucks and all sorts of things that can allow for digging and building and imaginative play. And this is not just for boys too. So allowing children of all gender to be able to have stuff that they can actually work in a space and build something and imagine something and build roads or houses or hills or whatever. So a construction area could be very fun. Likewise, what about a mini town? So something with roads and tunnels, and this could be either semi-permanent or permanent or a temporary thing. So when I was growing up, we had a sandbox, a pretty sizable sandbox, and that was our mini town because we were always digging in it, creating roads, and making tunnels in the sand and that sort of thing. And so it could be something temporary, or it could be something more permanent, where it has actually, you make roads and you plant grass in between and have little structures for houses and buildings and that sort of thing. So again, something that can bring the child into the space and be very excited to kind of immerse themselves into the space. Okay, now what about, this is more general, but what about varied topography? Okay, so even if it requires you just to rent a bobcat for a weekend or something, or to have somebody come in and design a space for you, something with, varied topography. So hills and valleys and whatever, and maybe tunnels going through it. But kids love having the ability to climb and to kind of roll down spaces and just to have something beyond just the typical flat yard. And so think about how maybe topography could be integrated into your space. What about a mini splash pad? So instead of your typical patio, what if you create a splash pad for your kids where they can have fun? You could turn on the water, allow them to play in the water. So it's a more permanent sprinkler system that's a lot more fun. So if you think about like a public splash pad, what could you create maybe as a private space for you and your family to be fun and exciting and to cool off on those hot summer days, and something that maybe is just also very visually interesting for your landscape, beyond just for your kids. And there are a lot of private resources to create these splash pads as well. So these aren't just a commercial thing, but you can also create them for your yard. And if you want to do that, you can have somebody do that professionally for you as well. What about just a giant toy storage area? So for all the outdoor toys, to make them easily accessible for your kids, so they can kind of, browse around, pick out what they want when they want it, and then bring it back, and they know where it goes when they're finished with it. So they know to bring it back and to put it away. And this allows them access to a space to, again, very independently play, to access what they want when they want it, and to be able to play independently from your supervision. Okay, what about kid-friendly tools? And so this could be anything from hardware type tools to outdoor landscaping tools. So my kids, they have access to most of our shed tools, and they're allowed to play with a lot of them. Of course, they're not out there chopping wood with axes or anything, because our oldest right now is 5 years old. But they have access to shovels, they have access to rakes, and all sorts of different little various tools that create, a feeling of being able to construct something on their own, or to be able to dig and to just interact with the space. And so the dirt pile I mentioned earlier is the victim of a lot of their excavation. With our eldest is able to go there with a mattock, actually. So it has it's kind of like a pickaxe, I guess, in a way. And as long as he's careful that nobody else is around, he's able to chop and to dig, and it gives him an ability to be very physical with that space in a way that's safe and healthy for him. And likewise, our kids love to dig and to kind of build little piles of dirt with their shovels, and to break apart the hard dirt with the mattock. And so they really love the space. And then to, of course, rake piles of stuff up together with a rake or a hoe. And so having access to those outdoor tools is very engaging for them. And likewise, also just hardware tools that are safe for them. So they actually have a little tiny hammer. Even our 2-year-old is able to, we have a block of wood that's in our shed kind of fastened to the floor, and it just has some little nails sticking out of it that are started for him to be able to nail in himself. And it's in a space where it's out of the way from traffic and it's not a trip hazard. And it allows for a lot of fun play for the kids to be able to try one activity and then run to another activity and do that for a little bit and then come back. And so it gives them the ability to just get out a lot of that energy in a way that's very helpful and develops very good motor skills and allows them to imagine at the same time. Okay, so the last piece I have here is, what about something like scavenger items? So right now, this is probably something I will incorporate into our landscape that I haven't done so yet. And this is something just very simple. So right now inside the house, our eldest son, he recently got this new pair of shoes, and on the shoe box, it had this interactive little game, and it had a bunch of these little items you cut out, and it was teaching about Native American Indian folklore and how Native American Indians used to live and that sort of thing. And so you could cut out the top of the lid and it turned into a headdress, and there's a little arrow we cut out and that sort of thing. So he really loved the activity. And there were these different items that he was able to cut out with our help. And what we decided to do is kind of hide them in various locations around the house. And he loves going to find them, to figure out where they are. And it occupies him so much where it's very helpful for us, but he's also very engaged and very happy in the process. And so incorporating that outdoors where you have a few items, maybe it's some painted rocks, maybe it's some garden gnomes or some fairies that you can hide and kind of move around outside, and even let them do the same. So kind of like the elf on the shelf, right? If you've ever heard of that for Christmas time. Well, something similar where you can hide these various objects around your yard and allow them to find them throughout time, and to be able to hide them themselves once they find them, or you just kind of variously move them from time to time as well. Could be very fun for them. So it's a very easy thing to do that creates a lot of mystery and excitement for your yard in general, and to really engage your kids and to bring them into the yard to interact with it as well. Okay, so now I have a few ideas of different garden themes. So if you actually want to create like a planted garden for your children, what are some of those themes that you could incorporate to make it more exciting for your children? So instead of just maybe being a general, pretty planting bed, how do you make it something that kids enjoy? So I have a few ideas here. One I already mentioned, and that's an edibles garden. So creating a garden that's safe and healthy for your kids, where they can see food actually growing and how it turns from just a plant into a food, can be very exciting for kids, and it can also make them want to eat their vegetables a lot more. So our kids love getting stuff out of the garden, and that can be something very exciting if they have their own very little garden that's just for them. What about a painted rock garden? So something that they can help create, and this could be rocks that are collected in various locations, and you can paint them to put little critters or creatures on them, or they can just be painted various colors to be exciting and different for kids, and something that they can kind of change and interact with and move the rocks around the garden or that sort of thing can also be very fun. What about a fairy garden or a gnome or elf garden? So this is basically like a miniature garden. I'll have links. So again, guys, I have tons and tons of links. So a lot of these things I've talked about, I actually have a link where I found some sort of resource. So definitely check out the show notes, especially if any of these ideas interest you. And so I found some really cool resources actually for creating fairy gardens. And just from the pictures, you can tell that kids just absolutely love this. So basically what it is you create this like little miniature garden, either somewhere in your landscape or somewhere in an established garden, or just in a pot. And basically it's a miniature garden where it looks like just a mini everything. So you use kind of like some moss for grass, and you have like a little mini stream maybe, or bridges, and a little mini house. And so some of them, it's like a space where fairies or gnomes or elves can come to play at night. And so you don't even have like an elf or anything. And others, they actually have little, figurines that they put in their garden. And so it creates this idea of mystery and fun, and kind of a little bit of fantasy, right? For your children, and to creating a space for this little mini creature that's kind of like a mysterious, fun creature. So anyway, apparently kids love this stuff. It sounds kind of fun. So that's a cool idea. And also the next idea is, what about just a flower garden for your kids? So right now, my boys, they love picking flowers for their mom and for various people in our family and friends and that sort of thing. And so just having access to safe flowers for your kids can be a lot of fun for them. So something they can feel comfortable going out there and just, picking flowers or smelling the flowers, seeing insects on the flowers, can be something very fun and exciting for the kids. What about something like a prehistoric garden or a dinosaur garden? So this could be something where maybe you hide like some little fossils in there and stuff, in something that they can have their dinosaurs to play in. Again, this is traditionally thought of more as like a boy activity, but again, this is none of these things like an outdoor kitchen. That's not necessarily just a girl activity. This is something that kids of all different backgrounds love. Okay. And same goes for like a dinosaur garden. So it's something, again, that they can imagine that they're in a different time, in a different world. And that's what it's about. Not necessarily what gender you are, or what, cultural, norms are existing. Okay. So So with a dinosaur garden, you can actually use plants that kind of create this feel. So something like you can use a couple like more ferns and kind of like large broad-leaved plants to kind of give it like almost like a prehistoric feel. Okay. And that's kind of a good segue into the next idea I have, which is what about like a tropical garden? Okay, if you live in the subtropics, this is pretty easy, right? But maybe in the more northern climates, you can select different plants, again, like ferns and even like banana trees can grow just as like an herbaceous plant. So basically they die back to the ground each winter in some of the northern climates, but even up as far as southern Ohio, you can grow banana trees that grows as a plant instead of a tree. And it can have these giant, huge leaves, and it gives this very tropical feel. And you can also use a lot of plants from around this climate in southern Ohio to give a similar feel. So selecting the right plants to give that feel can also just kind of give that feeling of escape for a child or a different world. And that can be very exciting. Okay. So now what about a sloped backyard? So here's a few sloped backyard ideas that I have that you can consider for your landscape. So maybe you have like just a big hill in part of your yard that feels like you can't really use it, or you don't have enough space for your kids. Well, there's stuff you can do here as well if you are willing to get a little creative. And so you can include a sloped backyard is awesome, of course, for a slide, right? So you don't need to actually have like a play gym with a platform. You can just have a slide right on your out of your backyard. And so that's something really fun for kids actually to have like a slide kind of embedded in the ground that they can go down. And these can actually be like custom made out of concrete to kind of twist and wind, or they can be slides that you just fix into your landscape that are pre-built already. So something to consider there. What about a water feature? So instead of, a typical fountain, what about like a running stream that goes down your yard, and then you have a little pump that just pumps the water right back to the top? It can be very exciting for kids to be able to float stuff down the stream, or to see it just kind of trickle down, and to also be able to hear it, to dip their toes in, that sort of thing. So it's a very sensory experience and a very interactive experience for children as well. So that can be very fun and exciting. Of course, steps, integrating steps, but in a fun way that kind of adds to the feeling of adventure or a feeling of mystery if they're kind of winding steps, or just, very different steps. Can just be fun for kids to be able to climb up, slide down the slide, climb back up the hill. And similarly, what about some climbing rocks or logs up the hill? So instead of just having steps, what about a space where kids can kind of scramble up some rocks or logs, or a suspended net, something like that allows the kids to be able to interact with that hillside in a very creative way. And last, what about a fort that's kind of built onto the hillside or into the hillside? It can be very fun as well. And so just some ideas there that I came up with for sloped backyards, because I know it can be hard to come up with some sloped backyard ideas and to be able to have fun with that space in your yard. All right, guys, I just had to stop and pause for a second to just catch my breath, because if you can't tell, I'm super excited about this stuff, and I hope you are too. And I've got a ton of content here as well. I'm almost done here, but stay with me, and let's get into the next piece. I have just a little bit more to cover here, but really awesome stuff. So if you can't tell already, I kind of have this awesome attraction to natural playgrounds. So what is a natural playground? I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about it, and I'm definitely considering, I've done tons of research on this, I'm definitely considering this for our backyard as we look to start redesigning our yard, our landscape, both front and back, and I want to create a more conducive space for our kids. And the idea of natural playgrounds is really exciting to me. So what is a natural playground? Well, basically it's a playground that has a lot of different elements involved in it. And it's not just your conventional, ladder, platform, slide, swing. While those can be very fun, they're not necessarily always that engaging for children. So they might go there, play for a little bit, and then they're kind of done. Well, the idea of a natural playground is to give them more imaginative experiences that are more immersive and also very fun for them at the same time. So some elements included here are like water, natural vegetation, different creatures or critters, sand or mud, natural sitting, standing, climbing, and hiding spaces, and also components that can be changed, built, or modified by the children as they play. So some of this stuff to me sounds really, really cool and just really, really interactive. And to be honest, if we build this, I might be out there playing in it too. So some of the ideas here that you can incorporate into a so-called natural playground are things like a water wall. So a vertical structure that has different, tubes and funnels and things that kids can play around with and pour water into it and see how it interacts with the space. What about an outdoor kitchen, which I already mentioned, something they can just use kind of natural materials like bark and mud and mulch or whatever, and kind of concoct their own little, fancy dishes of different things. Some climbing logs. So various just logs and structures that they can climb and jump over, sit on, lay on, hide behind, that sort of thing. What about a water pump station? So maybe you can have like a little water reservoir and they can pump water out. Like you see it, like our local children's museum has something like this, where it's a big interactive space with these pumps where the kids can pump up water and play with it. So you can incorporate something like this into your landscape as well. Outdoor musical instruments. So various things where they can hit them or move them to make noise. These don't have to be incredibly elaborate, but they can be a lot of fun for children just for making noise in various creative ways. What about some secret areas? So areas that they can hide behind to have their own little fort area or something, or their own little like secret space that they could crawl into and to imagine different things. And what about things that can attract critters? So something like birdhouses, bird feeders, critter logs, so logs that allow different creatures to live underneath and that sort of thing. What about a bat house or a pollinator garden? So bat houses can actually provide nesting structure for bats, or just roosting structure overnight, and over the daytime and that sort of thing. So it's something really fun if you have bat houses. First of all, you're the coolest parent in the neighborhood, right? And secondly, your kids can sit out there in the evening and see the bats emerge and start catching all the insects in your yard as catching all those mosquitoes, right? Those pesky mosquitoes that start to come out at the same time. So that can be a lot of fun and also a huge benefit naturally. And likewise, what about a pollinator garden? So we talked about a flower garden and an edibles garden. Well, what if your flower garden incorporates a lot of pollinator plants that can bring out a lot of pollinators, all sorts of bees and flies and different, just all sorts of different bugs that the kids can watch and can kind of see them buzzing around and feeding on the plants and having a great time. Can be a lot of fun and excitement for a kid. And last thing I have here is what about things like resources to identify different critters? So this could be bird books geared for kids, or insect books geared for kids, or just animal books geared for kids, things that you see around your yard or that you're starting to attract to your yard, things that where your kids can find these and identify them with your help a little bit, but providing the resources for them to do so. Likewise, what about nature journal contests that you could have between your kids, where who gets to see the most critters in their yard, or different types of critters in their yard, can really add some engagement to their space, and also in a way that provides some friendly competition with your kids to have some fun together and to learn new things. Okay. So that's the bit I have about natural playgrounds. I might talk about it in the future again, just because this area is so cool and so exciting, and you're starting to see tons of, I don't know if in your area maybe this is the case as well, but there's a lot of natural playgrounds that are popping up in municipal areas because it's being understood how fun, imaginative, and also developmentally beneficial they are for children. Okay, and with that, I want to talk about safety as well, which is very important. So with whatever you do in your yard, we want to make sure it's a safe place for our kids. And this kind of, in some way it goes without saying, but sometimes we don't realize something might be unsafe for our kids. So I just want to cover this a little bit and make sure we're really thinking about safety as we're developing a space for our kids. And so the first thing, of course, is eliminating or reducing the amount of sharp objects or corners, especially around their play spaces. can go a long way to preventing cuts and abrasions and that sort of thing. Likewise, reducing the amount of deep water they have access to. So I mentioned water features quite a bit. Well, we want to make sure it's not deep water that can be a hazard to children. And so this includes pools, of course. So we want to make sure our pools are fenced, or if our neighbors have pools, that their pools are fenced, or in the very least, we provide a fence barrier on our own property in between our property and our neighbor's exposed pool or pond. We also want to reduce the number of slippery surfaces. This isn't just after rain or during rain, but also in the mornings. Things can be covered with dew, or if things get a little dusty, they can become slippery. So making sure we reduce slippery surfaces, except for, of course, slides. We want those to be slippery because they're way more fun that way. We actually used to, my family's slide in our backyard, we had this awesome play gym that my family built. And actually, this is a very worthy segue or sidetrack. So I'm going to keep going. Is we actually got to help build our own play gym, and my dad planned this amazing play gym that we built in our backyard out of a bunch of treated lumber, and it's still standing in my parents' backyard. It's right now their grandkids love it. So my kids and their cousins as well really enjoy this play gym. But the slide was this big sheet metal slide, and we would every once in a while it would start to get a little sticky, so we'd go back there with some wax paper and ride down the slide on wax paper to wax up the slide again. And it was quite fun because you'd like zip down the slide super fast. Anyway, so we want to avoid slippery surfaces in our playgrounds for our kids, of course. Also avoiding toxic plants. And a lot of times these are plants you're not even aware of. So you might not necessarily be able to eliminate toxic plants from the landscape, but at least making sure your kids understand, and kids can understand this at an early age too, that if it's not a plant that they know is safe, that they don't put it in their mouth. So things like I mentioned, like potatoes and tomatoes, the foliage of those plants is toxic. Likewise, yew bushes, so those popular square bushes that people have in their front yard, those seeds and the leaves are highly toxic as well. Likewise, things like milkweed is toxic. So there's tons of plants that are toxic, and so making sure your kids either understand that this plant is unsafe, or you understand that, or eliminating those plants from your landscape as much as possible, or as an alternative, making sure your kids only know to put in their mouth what they know is safe. Okay, so just being careful about toxic plants in general. Likewise, chemical use. So reducing the use of chemicals is very important to me, especially around our kids. A lot of these chemicals, while they may be marketed as safe, a lot of them are endocrine disruptors, or things that can just disrupt or be unsafe for you, and especially your kids or your pets. So kids are much more susceptible to chemical exposure effects than adults, just with their size, their growth, and that sort of thing. So making sure you reduce the use of chemicals around the spaces your kids are in is very important. And the last thing I want to point out here too, especially if you have higher elevated spaces, that you have appropriate railings or barriers to prevent falls. Okay, so safety, important stuff. Make sure you do it. And with that, guys, I just want to say, as we wrap up this episode, let's consider embracing our inner child and really get creative, right? So the more creative you can get with designing this space or thinking about ideas for your space with your kids, the more fun your kids are going to have. Because what you're doing is you're immersing yourself back into your childhood and thinking about what are the things that made me have so much fun, or where I had more fun with my yard, or what did I want? What would it make it exciting for me? What were your favorite spaces to go visit when you were a kid? What were your favorite spaces to go play when you were a kid? And those things can go a long way to helping you design a fun space for your kids. Okay, so with that, check out all of the resources I've listed in the show notes today. There's a ton of resources. And likewise, you can go on over to ELY.how/episode 27 to find all these show notes as well. Now, if you want any specific ideas or recommendations for your particular yard and your family and thinking of what specifically would be most fun for your kids and how you can incorporate it into your landscape, this is where I can come in and help you specifically with my consultation. So I offer digital consultation. You can go over to ELY.how. That's ELY.how/consulting, and that'll take you to my consultation page where you can get in touch with me and we can make your yard better and have a lot more fun with your kids and your landscape. And guys, I'm doing this because I really care. I want to make sure we save time in our yards. We make it a better space for our family. And that's what this episode is all about, is spending more time doing what we love. And let's face it, we want to spend more time with our family and to have a better space for our family as well. So if you guys want some help, check out my consultation options at ELY.how/consulting. And likewise, feel free to also get in touch with people in your area. There's a ton of landscape designers that can help you design your space. And there's a lot more people that have growing experience in developing natural playgrounds or well-designed playground spaces for your children that can really enhance your landscape and also enhance the fun and imaginative play your children are able to have. And right now, it's so common. We want to get our kids away from the TV or away from their devices and to get outside more. And that's really important that we create a conducive space for them to do so. Otherwise, it's not a creative experience. And we want to create fun and we want to create a good experience where they can develop themselves physically and mentally and creatively. And that's what today's episode is all about. So with that, guys, make sure you check out the links in the show notes. Also, if you want to ever check out the website, you can just go to ELY.how. And with that, thanks for tuning in. And make sure you live with passion and make tomorrow better than today.